Hello everybody, welcome back to Building Blocks, where we program Minecraft mods live on camera. And tonight we are continuing work on Various Oddities 1.16, which is chiefly the manner of re-implementing creatures and systems from Various Oddities 1.12. Gonna be adding magic in its own separate mod, gonna be adding world gen in its own separate mod, that sort of thing. So this is just the creatures, which is to say, this is the version that 4chan really wants me to do. Because 4chan really hated it when I started adding items and other things that people wanted to, that actually did stuff. But anyways, so I have been chiefly working on two major things over the past week. So the first thing is that the creature type system has been significantly overhauled. A lot of very common effects now are handled entirely by the type bus. So, for instance, if we go up to here, this is where damage is increased, nullified, mitigated, all sorts based on your creature types. And we have an enum value called enum damage resist, and based on the aggregate value of that to a certain damage type, your damage is increased by 50%, decreased by 50%, wiped out entirely, or is handled normally. That is handled based on how all of your types, or how all of your types respond to the given damage, and how those types intermingle. So, for instance, if you have two different types that are resistant to the same damage type, it does not actually result in being immune to it. But if you have a vulnerable type and a resistant type to the same damage, then they cancel out and they're just normal, for instance. So yeah, that's pretty handy. Means it's one additional new step towards these being really like usable and functional and resilient and diverse, I guess. Versatile, that's the phrase. Another thing that we have now is the action. Actions are very simple currently. They are eat, sleep, or breathe. Eat is eating food and starving to death without it. Sleep is sleeping in a bed and spawning phantoms without sleep. Breathe is breathing air and drowning without it. Also covers suffocation. If you are of a type that does not breathe, and you have no type that does breathe, then you will you won't take suffocation damage ever. So that's pretty nice. But if you have any type that adds that, then yeah, you need to breathe. It is worth noting that more or less, Anonymous Cheerer, thank you for that. Let me see. So yeah, it's worth noting that super types and subtypes are now significantly more distinct. Super types tend to have the actions listed, but subtypes don't tend to. They don't tend to do pretty much anything with the actions, but they can add actions and they can also apply actions. So for instance, the outsider can only breathe. They don't need to eat, they don't need to sleep. Consequently, they don't spawn phantoms and they don't take starvation damage ever. They can eat food, I should stress. If they're low on, they don't take the damage, but their hunger still goes down, so they can still eat food. Because otherwise, it would just be like. Otherwise, my options are they always just so gradually starve to death, or they're always able to regenerate health, which is. Both of these are equally dangerous. So it's just that you don't take starving damage in that case. But if an outsider has the native type, which is a subtype that can only be applied to things that are already outsiders, they can also sleep and eat, which means they will start to spawn phantoms and they can starve to death. Fairly straightforward. A lot of the more common elements of types have been moved to actual flat variables in the type handler rather than being things I have to re-enter functions for every single time. So for instance, immunity to poison, paralysis, and critical hits are now just booleans inside of the type handler, and that's then handled by the type bus as well. The functions in the type handler for actually like responding to specific events are still here, in the event that I need something a bit more versatile than what is just like handled there. So the Fae are a great example of that. They use the get damage resist function that type handler does, but in their case they check if it's like iron or silver. So just a little bit of a demonstration there. Currently, a lot of these types are fairly, like, just flat bonuses, which is fine. By standard in D&D, everybody is a humanoid, basically, and they get heck all, so everything is meant to be a little bit plus or minus, mostly plus compared to them. But the trio that take no critical hits, paralysis, or poison isn't much its own thing, and don't spawn phantoms. We'll see if we can find that whole set right there. That includes elementals, who do take falling damage, but can regenerate health naturally. And yep, it's just those two. So currently Elemental, Construct, and I think Ooze? Yeah, I think Elemental, Construct, and Ooze are the three most powerful of the super types. Ooze because it has no critical hits, no paralysis, no poison, breathes and eats, but is not vulnerable to fire, as is the case with plants. So, just sort of a thing. Elementals do not have an innate fire resistance type, so there's that, neither do constructs. They're just sort of like, I theoretically, it depends on how much you value the lack of natural regen, I guess. Just as a thought. Both the aquatic and water type are currently identical. The only thing that separates them is that the amphibious supertype the amphibious subtype can only be applied to aquatic creatures. What's gonna happen later on, when I figure it out a little bit more, is that aquatic creatures that don't have the amphibious will basically have the dolphin problem of they need to be in the water for, like, a reasonable period. Like, they won't be able to breathe air indefinitely, it'll be like holding their breath there. Water doesn't get that because that's meant more for, like, elementals and whatnot, whereas aquatic is just anything that lives in the water. Okay. Another thing I've added, another thing is that water types and aquatic types need to have a slight speed boost in water. Currently, they just de facto get given the conduit power effect when they're in water, but they also ostensibly all have a swim speed, which means that they should go faster than just a regular player inside of the water. But currently, the only way I could do that would be by the Dolphin's Grace effect, and it is absurdly high, I know from experience, because there's plenty swimming around my island on Dungeon Maker. So I need to actually, like, hack in and monitor an actual variable in there to just apply that when you have the appropriate types. And then on that line of water types and such having swim speed is that down here, we actually have an effect related specifically to the Earth subtype, because all Earth creatures have a burrow speed. Burrow isn't really a thing in various oddities or Minecraft in general, other than digging. So, in this case, Earth-type creatures get a flat 30% bonus to their dig speed whenever they are mining Earth or Rock-type things. So that's things like dirt, grass, cobblestone, stone, andesite, bricks, all manner of things. So that's pretty handy. If you're looking for, like, a way to just figure out what kind of things and what kind of way you want to play, you're very able to do that. And on to the next thing to show off, which is the /types command. And oh boy, that was, as I anticipated, it was less bothersome than typing out the settlement command again, but nonetheless, pretty hefty. So there's 6 different variants to this. We have list, remove, add, clear, set, and test, which is actually kind of the one I'm most fond of the lot. So let's get into game and see how that works. Ooze. Yeah, previously known as slime, but officially in D&D it's referred to as ooze, so. With burrowing beasties, could you switch off the thing that damages if you're surrounded by blocks? Damaging by being surrounded by blocks is suffocation damage. Most creatures are affected by suffocation damage. The problem is, it's easy to make something no-clip, but unless you also turn off their gravity, what then happens is they just fall through the world. So, it's, I guess I could look into how Origin does it, but Origin is on Fabric. So how they accomplish it with their Phantom Origin type is not necessarily a good thing for various oddities, and also in that context we would need to figure out how to apply it to the Pathfinder. So, plus a mob that can just break stuff is generally a bad thing. Mobs that break things via moving around pretty much immediately necessitate, substantial reaction. Okay, so here we are. So, slash types. We got all of our things here. Clear, quite happily, just removes it either from a target's entity type or an actual given target. So you can use this in command blocks with just variable things. I'm going to go with div. Okay. Removed all types. Let's see what types we have. Because we are a player, removing those types just means that we are now the default types of player. So once again, yep, now defined as humanoid. And if we hover over humanoid, it actually gives us this nice little description of what that means. And let's see what all the types are. There we go. As we can see, there's quite a few of them. 15 super types, 15 subtypes. So we can see what all of these do, or rather what they are. What they do is a little more complicated. And if we click on any of these, it will immediately input the list command to list all of the creatures of that type. So for instance, let's see all of the humanoids, shall we? 3 creatures, players, goblins, and kobolds. Wonderful. Not all of these subtypes and supertypes, I should know, especially the subtypes, have actual impact. Reptile, shape changer, goblin, for instance, don't do anything. Extraplanar and native should actually be applied based on your native dimension and where you are currently. If you're not there, then you're an extraplanar. If you are there, then you're native. But it's currently just hard written because I don't have a way of knowing exactly what dimension a creature originates from currently. But other things do actually have impacts. So fire types are immune to fire. For instance, you could live quite happily in the Nether just by having this subtype. You could live quite happily in water just by having this one. Just all sorts, that sort of thing. Okay. So that is the first little handy thing. The next thing we can do is remove things and add things. So if we want to add a subtype, add a supertype, we just use those. Same targeting schematics there. Theoretically, in the future, could you specify what dimension you're native to? Yes. It's mostly a config thing, which is a bit bothersome right now, but yes, absolutely. Set is probably the version that will see the most use. So for instance, set dev 2, and then it will act. I should stress, this takes up to 5 different types. The first one, it just suggests super types, but you could actually give it 5 subtypes and it will work just fine. It just suggests super types here as a means of helping people who might not be very familiar with this. So, in this case, let's define dev as a construct, an augmented construct, who is shape changer and extraplanar. And just for good measure, let's say they're also divine. Why not? So dev is now defined as construct augmented extraplanar holy shape changer, and that is once again also handily typed, so we can actually see what all of these things mean. Very handy there. I wish I could do the old thing where I could just give it an unstated length of inputs and it just solves them all, but oh well. So yeah, this is considerably more complicated than it used to be, but nonetheless pretty handy. So, as a construct, I don't take falling damage. He said right before he takes falling damage, but we'll see. Yep, all good. just a dull thud for the most part. I also can't be poisoned, so effect, give, dev, poison. Just instantly gone. Didn't even have time to actually do any damage, which is good because there isn't actually a poison damage in Minecraft. It's just magic damage that happens periodically. It's not great, but oh well, I didn't program that. Let's see. Holy creatures are immune to evil damage, but we don't currently have a source of evil damage. We also don't currently have a source of holy damage. Or cold damage. Fire damage, we have plenty of, thank you, Minecraft. Minecraft has a variable for damage sources that says, are they fire damage? Augmented is another sort of do-nothing subtype that's mostly just flavor. Augmented creatures have been altered from their original form or nature, often through magic, that sort of thing. Whereas constructs are inanimate matter, given mobility and purpose, usually through magical means. So I guess in this case I'm like, I don't know, some kind of statue or whatever, or lump of clay that was turned into a walking creature, that sort of thing. Now, additionally, constructs cannot sleep. So, let's just show that off. If I get myself a bed. Let's see, let's go with a red bed, why not? The classic bed. So it's dark and spooky, and let's see, we want to be in survival for this. And if we were awake long enough, mobs would spawn around us and phantoms would start to chase us, that sort of thing. But we are constructs and we can't sleep because we don't need to, which means we actually can't sleep at all. But fortunately, because being a construct or other creature that doesn't sleep and then just constantly getting chased by phantoms would be a massive pain in the neck. If you're a player and you're one of those types, it just flats your last slept timer so you never spawn phantoms. It's the most easy way of making it useful, basically. But yeah. This is a feature that will affect other things in Magic. For instance, if you're a creature that doesn't sleep, then nobody can put you to sleep. That sort of thing. Let's see, as a construct I also don't need to breathe, so I can just stand in this water over here and just constantly be fine. That sort of thing. Let's see, types, clear, dev, and just set the time back to noon, shall we? We're gonna go with the water type, there we go. Okay. So I stand in here, then we now get the conduit power effect, which would mean that we could breathe perfectly normally, but we can anyways, as well as see a bit better. It's a little different from having night vision, but yeah. I might dial down the duration of it just so it's only whilst you're there, but I need to make sure it's like 5 or less or something. But yeah. So there's that. Hasn't been a ton of progress with the mobs over the past week, just because that took a long time. But one thing I have done is I have corrected an oversight, I guess, in some of the mobs. So currently there are about 3 or 4 different creatures that are monsters and 4 creatures that are creatures, which is to say things like animals and whatnot. Formerly, like in the case of the monsters, it's pretty much a given that they despawn after a while. Like, unless they're holding specific gear or there is a specific, like, need met, they pretty much never despawn. Like, they pretty much always despawn. With creatures, on the other hand, they pretty much always don't. Because the idea is that they're parts of the natural wildlife and you've wandered off, you come back and they're still there, that sort of thing. None of the oddities did, however, because I did not set that before I released the first version. So the kobolds despawned, the small crabs despawned, small scorpions and their small rats also despawned, which did not help with their spawn rates because everything else in their category could stick around forever. So there's like 10 animals per person under most circumstances, versus like 70 monsters. So you would get like a few sheep and then you'd never see kobolds. That has been corrected for the next version. What has also been corrected for the next version is the default spawn config, because the numbers were drawn directly from 1.12 and had not been properly modified according to the changes in standards of 1.16, which meant that basically everywhere was goblin central. At least goblins aren't like hostile by default, but it was nonetheless a little unpleasant. So they're now a bit more evenly spread and such. But there is still that problem with the spawn caps. You can use mods to change the spawn caps, I'm fairly certain, but oh well. No bad thing, goblins are the best. Yes, can confirm. Yeah, the goblins. The goblins who will attack basically everyone nearby who they think is allied with you, essentially, or is in general a threat, which includes your pets. And everything after that, they will just, like, attack the nearest thing. So if you're on your own, they're mostly just like pigmen. They're like zombie pigmen used to be. But if you're in, like, an adventuring party with your friends and whatnot, they will attack all of you. So, yeah, like, goblins are mean. They're not quite as mean as kobolds, because kobolds will all just try to attack the nearest identified target, and they don't try to identify new ones. But kobolds, if they lose track of you, they will try to hunt you down, because they need to make sure you're gone. Whereas goblins are a bit more defensive. Goblins annihilated you on the server last night? Oh dear. Don't know what you did to make them mad. Ooh. Exist. Who knows? They might have just identified you as some kind of threat, but who knows? Who knows? So yeah, that is the types command. It is very versatile, very helpful, and it currently does affect what happens in the config. I don't know if I'm doing it necessarily in the most efficient manner, but it is how it works, and it works. Oh, I forgot to show off Test. Test is my favorite one. Oh, how could I forget to show off Test? A snarky joke about David Bowie. Is that why Dave got attacked by the goblins? I mean, Goblin King should totally be a thing I make at some point. Like, ostensibly goblin settlements will be mostly led by shamans, but I guess above them could be, like, a chieftain or something. At the moment on the UR server, there's goblin raiders and kobold scouts running around. Oh. Yeah, once I get this version finished and out, we will be doing significant improvements to the settlements of the kobolds and the goblins, so that hopefully you'll be able to actually run operating settlements and such of them. Okay, so we have this command here, and much like the other ones, it has an option of either an entity type or a target. In this case, I'll take an entity type because I know there's a kobold over there. So what we can do is we can ask, target is whatever we like. We can give it super types, subtypes, that sort of thing. We're just gonna go with humanoid for the time being. And basically, what this means is that we can use command blocks to actually check this stuff. So let's just do a little bit of a demonstration of that. This is very much purely a command block kind of thing, but here we are. So types, test, entity. Let's go goblins as well. Why not? Are humanoid. Test that goblins are humanoid. Again, we could say at P if we're the nearest player. We could say any player. That's, pardon me, anything, that sort of thing. Okay, and then if we get ourselves a comparator and a redstone block to trigger this thing, then padump. We now have a redstone output and signal that tells us that we have managed to identify that goblins are a type of humanoid. If we said, like, the nearest player within 4 blocks or something of a given position is, like, undead, for instance, we could have a door open that is specific to an area for undead, that kind of thing. So, types can now actually be used to control redstone, if you have a command block. But that's pretty sweet. I always love building in things that help this for, like, adventure maps. I know there's not really a grand community, or at the very least I'm not aware of a grand community that's particularly interested in making adventure maps for, like, modded environments, but Ferris Oddities was built on Dungeons and Dragons, and it would be very strange if we didn't give people the tools they need to actually make dungeons with their dragons, that sort of thing. But yeah, like, I could use that on a server, for instance, if I wanted to have, like, maybe there's a beacon that only turns on in the presence of a dragon or whatnot. Like, that's a thing I can do now. Yay. But okay, so That's all of the types command, the types bus I've talked about, the handlers. Yeah, there's something. All right. I've tried to basically just streamline this entry as much as possible. And our next thing on the list is faction rep. Drafting tables will take me an age because there's basically nobody that's done UI, as near as I can tell. There's nobody that's done like just a UI, like not just like how do I put this? There's UIs like opening a book in Minecraft, and then there's UIs like opening a furnace, which are containers. And near as I can tell, thus far I've not been able to find the source code of a single mod that makes a UI that isn't for a container, which is kind of a pain in the neck. Because, oh well. There's also no tutorials making UIs in 1.16 as near as I can tell, so I'm having to, well. But anyways, faction rep. So, there is a variety of creatures that are defined as being faction creatures. These are frequently also settlement creatures, but not necessarily always. They might just be roving bands and whatnot. And you start off with an initial number between -100 and 100, frequently 0. And that number can rise depending on how you interact with them, and it can lower depending on how you interact with them. And your current value in that score will determine how these creatures behave towards you regarding to their specific faction. So if you have a very low reputation with them, they'll attack you on sight or just flee in general. If you have a very high one, on the other hand, they'll like give you discounts at their shops, they'll like accompany you on quests, all sorts of things. The highest tier is like reserved for being able to directly control settlements, for instance. So if you're on really good terms with goblin kind and a goblin settlement just happens to spring up right outside your base, you can go over there and politely tell them to move, that sort of thing. Or you can recruit them as a workforce, whichever you like. It's entirely up to you at that stage. I love that part of settlements. Right now, in 1.12, settlements are handled pretty simply. It is just a name and an initial value. I would like it to be significantly more complex than that. I would like it to be that the factions also have values for how, like, what their relationship and standing is with other factions. So, for instance, the goblins and the kobolds are essentially in lore always at war. They hate each other. They will attack each other on sight. But if we define that instead as being a consequence of their faction settings, we consider that initially their factions are, like, always at war, but if you wanted to have kobolds and goblins in, like, the same environment, then you could actually just set them to be 0 to each other. And that is just a means by which you can slightly more control the AI of the AI inside of the game, that kind of thing, which is lovely, always fun. So if you had, for instance, like if you want to do like a team playthrough on a server, you could have like the kobold team and the goblin team, and you could set them to be like you could set the goblins and the kobolds to be meaningfully neutral towards each other, so that they don't just attack each other all the time, that sort of thing. But yeah, so the trouble, of course, is setting that up inside of the config, and then I also need to figure out player data, which is a whole other kettle of fish. And then there's the faction command, which just sets your reputation and whatnot. But yeah, I think I can probably chuck together a faction command, relatively straightforward. But yeah, there was also a thing of having custom factions, like if it was part of the MBT data. Unfortunately, that's also a little harder to do now because of just how MBT data is handled through things. I'm procrastinating tremendously here, aren't I? But anyways, here's faction rep. This is ostensibly the player data part, and it handles everything more or less that 1.12 did. Here's the attitudes. So they will be hostile to you, they'll be unfriendly, indifferent, friendly, or helpful. I suppose theoretically the highest tier of helpful would be like reverent, whereas I guess the lowest tier of hostile would be like adversarial, vengeful, vindictive. I don't know, but I don't really have a reason to separate it that much. These are actually based on the tiers of attitude towards you based on your diplomacy rolls and such in D&D. Phew. So it's a matter of here's the range, here's what they do, that kind of thing. You can see you get quite a bit of bonus for having them be on very good terms with you. Okay. So, how do we want to do this? Well, firstly, I can probably simplify that. Firstly, I think we need to just get ourselves the faction bus. I think. I'm not quite sure where the bus for that went. Apparently I haven't gotten it. Abilities.faction. Let's just move this. Because naturally, in order to actually have factions do anything, we need to actually have a bus for it. Now I should stress that your actions as a player can alter your reputation and standing with a given faction. Mobs, on the other hand, shouldn't ever change their factions. Firstly, because that could seriously mess up an adventure map, that kind of thing. Secondly, because mob AI is very heavily uncontrolled. So consequently, what they do could cause the reputation to go up and down all the time in like very bizarre and unpredictable ways. And that would mean that you would log in one day and maybe the kobolds and the goblins are at war, maybe the next day they're at peace, maybe the day after that they're like really helping each other out, and the next day they're at war once again. It would be too very heavily too very like, what's the phrase here, erratic. So yeah, we prefer not to have that. How much of this am I gonna change? Yes, we're gonna need entities. Yes, we're going to need that predicate. How many problems we got now? 38, which is actually surprisingly few. Most of them names. Oop. Just change that to living entity, thank you very much. Accidentally part of a word. Okay, get entity bounding box, got mildly more succinct. Despite the fact that get bounding box and get entity bounding box used to be different things. I'm guessing that's target selectors. Or not, apparently. What is your problem? From entity to living entity. Right, because they changed it to entity. They changed entity living to living entity, but this is the same exact function that it used to be, so it's still called get entity living. Heck if I know why. Alright, they need to be mob entity now for that. Because living entities have a, mob entities have an attack target, but living entities just don't. I don't know why they drew that boundary, but they did. Well, that of course is now faction bus. Yeah, these are all calculated, by the way, at the lowest possible priority, which is to say all other effects have happened. So, if there is something that, for instance, prevents them from taking damage, then they're not counted as having been attacked, that kind of thing. Because if you just sort of, like, wave your sword in their direction and nothing happens to them, then they don't really have a reason to get angry at you. Which is just an entertaining thing. This I'm pretty sure it was a custom one. Just to find out if it's up here. Yeah, player trade event. That's a custom one. Because there's not actually an event for trading, for the most part. On living heal. This is an enormously weird one. Basically, whenever something heals, if there's a player, if there's a creature nearby that is not creative, not their revenge target, and like they can see, then they just sort of passively give them some rep. It's because there's not a way for me to really tell them that the origin of like their healing effect was a player that threw a healing potion or something. A lot of this is somewhat vague and assuming, but oh well. Okay, can we get your senses? Probably not as a living entity, but we can probably get it as a mob entity. At a guess. I know I've used. I know for certain that I've used mob entities before. So oh yeah, there it is. Clicks right in. Okay. So can AI target? I'm gonna guess that there is still a function for this somewhere. So that just asks if you're creative. There's gotta be something in here. But did they really just get rid of all of the selectors then? Yeah, there's generally nothing in here. Okay. What about nearest? Like the attackable target? This must still take a predicate, surely. Apparently not. Huh. Okay, nearest? Here we are. How about you? You can take a predicate. Okay. What kind of predicates? Entity predicates. Are there some defaults here? Apparently not. Well, technically yes, but still. I still haven't figured out what is going on with the brain section here. There's goals and there's brains, and as near as I can tell, they're just two different task systems. Like, I don't know what is going on there. Okay. This is weird. Well, at least I can approximate what this used to be, which was just not creative or spectator. But surely there's a thing for that already. Let's check zombies. Abstract zombie? Nope, just zombie. Okay. Okay, so nearest attackable targets, player entity, for instance. Do you have... that goes from there, so it does not have a custom predicate, so it's just whatever gets default here. Can target invulnerable. Perchance, is a player invulnerable if they're also in spectator mode? Is that how they've managed to get around it? I wonder. Probably, reasonably speaking, but friendly fire, invulnerable targets. Nope. Nope. Oh, that's... Hang on. Guys, this program cannot ever be run. It must be destroyed immediately. There's a typo. Just look at that. Line of sight. What self-respecting programmer releases a program with a typo? Does not like it. Okay. Right. Fine then. We'll just define our own. That is the right one. What's going on with you? What's the missing one called? Can AI target? I guess this needs to be actually like living entity. Or I guess entity works. Probably. Grand. And there's another one. Is alive. Yeah. But that one's probably fine. Okay, got a few missing factions, as near as I can tell. Reinstate our boolean here for rep change, I guess. Default to true. And point that over here properly. And we're down to 4 errors. Okay, what's with this RNG problem then? Guessing that needs to be living entity. There we go. Okay, so now it is mostly problems with functions that don't exist here. What's your problem? Player entity, player, source mob, change. Okay, should that would be fine. Oh, because it needs to be a living entity. Yeah. Is that the case for all 3 is the next question? Probably. There we go. Right. So now we just need to subscribe this over in various oddities. Yep, there we are. Okay, so now that works. Doesn't accomplish anything right now, but it works. So the next thing is to actually put faction data into the players. And that is basically just a map of strings to integer values, and again, we have to go back to the config. The config does not allow compound MBTs. It does not allow open-ended values. So we can't just ask it for, hey, here's, like, we can't just, like, and we can't, the config basically does not allow you to put in values that it hasn't predefined as there. To do that, we have to be very sneaky and clever about things. Oh, hey Dusty, how you doing? So what we can do is define some. We can try and define a string which is a that is an MBT essentially. We can compound our default values into an MBT, turn that into a string, and then feed that as the default value in that variable. From there, if we define it as a list, we might be able to do. We might be able to actually work that out properly. There's an idea. Okay. Got type settings. Let's. Do we put this into mobs? Probably. Okay, let's actually put this, instead of having that in general, let's have it right next to the thing it's useful for. Okay, pretty much everything is ending up in mobs, but we kind of expected that for this version. Okay. Public final forge config spec string. I know you'll take it. I know you'll have a string, but yeah, you can see we're very limited here. We can give them enums, but not very much else. Another problem is that when we define it as a string, we have to allow for there to be errors. If there is a problem with how someone has input their string, then it might not work out well. So when we load them in from the config, we need to make sure that we actually validate them. What is your problem? Value spec is not generic. I guess that's to be config value then. There you go. Right. Okay, let's see how it feels about that. Maybe you've got a problem now? Nice. Okay, no problems. Good. Let's boot that, quickly check the config change, and then I'll take my first break. Oh yes, Foxmug today. Okay, so that's fully booted, so in here... Yeah, we got our verbose log, which is debugging, mainly. We've got types matter, status velocity will disable the effects of all types, mostly because it turns off the type bus. We've got the mob types. So many vermin. So many vermin. As a point of note, vermin is parented to the vanilla type of arthropod. So Bane of Arthropods does actually work against rats as well. Weird, but it works. I guess it's technically speaking Vermin Bane in that case. Okay, player's good, so we got Dev here. Yep, as water, because that's what we left them as. And here's our AI controls, our mob spawn settings, which are similarly stored as strings. They get decomposed into proper values. And there we have defaults. Good. I don't like that it comes before reputation changes, but oh well. So with that, we should be able to get a start on having some kind of data, some kind of complex data at the very least, input. Okay, back in 10 minutes, everybody. See you then. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice little break there. If you're new to watching the coding streams, I take a break on the hour, if I remember, just because staring into code for hours on end is not good for your eyes. It is like the least I can do to take care of myself. Anyways, what I have quickly set up here is a faction defaults class, and this will host the actual faction class that we can use as a short holder for how to actually generate and store things from faction to MBT and back, as well as determine what our faction is initially. So let's create ourselves a function in here that just returns ourselves a string so that we can actually plug that into the config, hopefully. So we want public string defaults to string. Okay, string value, I guess, equals that, and return a value. Now, in our case, we can be a bit sneakier about this because we know that we're going to be able to turn these factions into MBT. So let's give ourselves a compound MBT here. So write to MBT. Might as well give it a compound MBT anyways here. Doesn't need to do much right now, that's fine. So, list MBT, I think is what it is. They changed the names around, so I'm never quite sure. Okay, for every faction in default factions, list add faction dot write to MBT new compound MBT. Okay, then we just return that list to a string. Okay, so now if we go over to our config, when we're picking up our default value here, we can actually just ask for faction defaults. Didn't make it static, that would help. Static basically just means you don't need an instance of it, which is helpful in a lot of situations. Okay, defaults to string. There we go. Might be a hell of a long string, but we already have a hell of long strings using the spawn defaults, so that's fine. Okay. Now, obviously, we need to actually write these things. So, read from NBT. Going to need at least a string, ideally initial rep. So let's see. Compound set. Oh, I guess put string. Name before this dot name. I'm going to need an integer as well for the starting rep. And then we have a map of relations. Now we could convert that to a list. It'd be a bit easier. A list of tuples of strings to integers. But a map is easier to actually search, so we'll keep that as is for the time being. But that said, we don't need to keep it as a... We don't need to keep it as that for what we're about to do here. So let's see. If relations is not empty, then list MBT relation map equals new list MBT, and for every relation that we have, every string, we want to, let's see how we're going to do this. I guess it just needs to be compounds, doesn't it? I know that theoretically lets us write more complex relationships later on, at least. So this would be faction And that would be relations dot get that faction. There. Okay. So that's all the data we currently need. Now in theory, what we can do later on as well is add more data to this, like give them some preferences, for instance, so maybe one particular faction is really down with murder, and another one really not so down, not like, really actually not down with murder, that sort of thing. Okay. So there are two things that we know are in every single faction, that is a name and an initial reputation with them. So, string name equals compound, get string name, and int rep equals compound, get int initial rep. Okay. So now we can just construct that right there. Okay. That gets us a faction. Doesn't include the reputations, but we're working on that. If compounds contains relations of type, I think it's 11 for lists. Let's find out. 9. I went in the opposite direction. Compounds are 10. We construct the relationship map. Okay, that gets us the data, so now we just need to basically run this function down here. Very quick and helpful, just adds a relation. So data get string name and data dot get integer rep. Okay. Right. So now, if we doctor our config values down here, let me just separate this up. I have a ton of I have a ton of notepad things open just so I don't forget stuff. Okay. So now if we just get rid of that entirely and reboot, we should see data for the goblins and the kobolds turn up. Now we won't be decoding that just yet, but it'll be there. This isn't necessarily the hardest part, it's just the part that's relatively convoluted and also actually I know how to do. My arm is aching like the dickens today. Partially because it had a needle stuck in it and blood drawn like a few days ago, but also partially because I had to carry all the groceries home yesterday. A lot of groceries. Oh boy. Almost ran out of space in the trolley, that's how many groceries. Okay, that should have updated our config over here. Yes, good. Okay, very good. So that gives us this lovely string. Don't know how well I can get it all on shot. There you are. Okay. So as we can see, we now have bounded compound NPTs in here defining the name, the relationships, the initial reputation, all what we actually definitely want to see. Grand. Now we have to get it back, essentially, and the first question that we have is, can we read a list NPT from strings? Is that a thing that we can do? Is there a read here? ToString. But I'm not seeing a read, interestingly enough. I mean, we know that it's a list of compounds. That's something to our advantage. The problem being there are commas, and so they're compounds in string form, like separated on most sides by commas, except that their internal values are also separated by commas, so we can't just break them up by commas. A little bit of a problem there. And there doesn't appear to be anything in here that reads. I see write. I don't actually. I see to string. I don't actually see the opposite. That's interesting. How does this get written? How does this get read then? Because it must get actually like it must get rewritten, like recomposed. Nothing here that I can see. Okay. Okay, where does list MBT come up? Let's find where it gets reassembled. Ah, Jason, I see. Get tag from Jason. That could be it. That only gets us a combined MBT though. Whereas we're looking for a tag. Or a list rather. Oh, I might have to have Flying a look over this with her regex magic. I mean, there's read MBT right there. Could I call that? Data inputs. Sized I can't encounter. No, that wouldn't help me at all. Oh, that's doing some weird stuff there. Okay. If we know it's a set of compounds, well, how does that help us? We could just actually create a, like, save the string as a compound rather than default, and then we can just theoretically just reconstitute it from that, assuming compound MBT does have a from string. Or a read down here somewhere. Which we presume it must, because compound MBT is the format that's used in all manner of mobs, and must therefore at some stage be a string, essentially. But no, I don't see that either. Oh, how very strange. Perchance can we get that as JSON? Nope. Doesn't even exist. Okay. What else creates... What else turns a string into an MBT object? The data command. That's what. It's kind of the data command's main thing. If we go to the merge section here somewhere. There you are. MBT compound tag arguments. Get MBT. Okay. Apparently exists. Okay. So JSON to MBT that will get us a compound MBT. Apparently. Okay. So if we create ourselves a compound MBT, create that, list. Actually type properly helps. Okay. And then let's see our string, we know where to get that from. So values equals config vo dot mobs faction settings faction defaults. Yep. Get. We probably won't call it faction defaults later on, but it's fine for right now. Okay, so compound mbt comp equals new JSON to mbt values read. What's your problem? Constructor is undefined. It's right there. Oh, did I? No, I have not typed. I have not mistyped it, as near as I can tell. Okay, that's a string reader. That could be it. Okay. Okay, next question. What do we create a string reader from? We can literally create that from a string. Okay, that's good to know. Which then begs the question, why do we need it to be anything else? But, oh well, here we are. Guessing it's the Java version. I was wrong. Okay. I will actually have a message in here, but for right now, it's fine. So let's see. So if we manage to successfully do that, we want to say faction list equals comp.getList factions, and the answer there is 10? Compounds are 10, right? I am correct about that, yes? Yes, okay. That really should just be an enum value at this point, but oh well. Then a faction list does not equal null, and is also not empty. Then we iterate through each one, creating ourselves a faction and then adding it to our list. So far, relatively good. Okay, so faction equals new, or actually rather faction dot read from. That would be faction list dot get compound at I. Just gonna wrap that in boundaries as well, just in case there's a problem with that. Okay. Let's shove this in the log for the moment. Okay, now we just need to actually call this from somewhere, and the bus makes the most sense. Because there is actually an event for when the config is loaded. How's everybody doing tonight, by the way? There should be an event for this. Modconfig.reloading, apparently. Okay. Could also probably do with typing this, but it's probably fine for the most part. In theory, we can just also go with modconfig event because it appears to function with both of those. But just for safekeeping right now, I'm going to say boof. Just make sure we have the most recent version. Okay. No, go away. So if I've done this properly, we should see something in our logs telling us what's going on. Okay, check the log. And yeah, this has probably changed. Let's see if it has changed appropriately. It has not, which means it probably does not have the right data in there. So we probably won't see anything in here, in fact, regarding what we're looking for. Okay, so let's just close that. Get that off. If there's no value, it'll regenerate with the default value, which is the first thing we need. Oh, hi Barra, I missed that message I've heard. The trials and tribulations. Okay, so, factions. Good. Good start. And then we also want to look at the log, which there are Mini. And both of them have been updated. This one has the full values, I believe. Good. Can we find the phrase faction? A little bit, yes. Scanning, scanning. Directory. Incorrect key. Was corrected from null to that. That's fine, that's what we're looking for anyways. That's just it actually adding the thing. Good. But that is the last instance of that being called. Interesting. Okay. Yep. Didn't get called. Ordinarily I would just do this in the console, but the way that they've changed Forge means that the amount of text that just gets dumped into the console actually overflows how much text Eclipse likes to have in here, because it prints out every entry on every registry, and I don't know why the hell they thought that was a smart idea. But here we are. Okay. We could reboot it and see if that calls it, but that shouldn't be the issue. Erase looking for 4 lines of text, reading factions, the string value of the faction's config, and then 2 lines saying we're loaded goblins and goblins and kobolds. That's all we're looking for. Just for good measure, let's actually boot up a world in here. Nope, I don't see it anywhere. That's interesting. Should have chicken goblins. There's less goblins, I think. No, it does not seem that the log got called. Okay. I wonder why that happened. Oh, night gorilla. Slept well. Okay. So somehow this didn't get called. What event bus does that get put on, exactly? That might be it. Is it the general thing? Not that I can tell. Mod lifecycle event bus. Okay, that might be it. Next question. Where the hell is the mod lifecycle bus? Build bake event, I guess. I'm trying to think what will have this. Fire through the mod container's event bus occur. Another option is we literally just put a thing here that says read it out. Which I think might help. I think that might suffice. At the very least, it'll tell us if it's reading it out properly. Because we know what that function's called. The goal here is to make sure that we actually have factions loaded into the server, and from there, we can create a custom attack target goal that, instead of hard coding mobs to attack, will actually check the faction reputation of everyone's. And there's apparently a problem. Okay. Which I can barely see, I think, because it just flew right past it. Okay, there we go. What we got? A null pointer, apparently. At the faction defaults. That seems impossible, because it created it right before, but... And yeah, the problem happens right there, apparently. Okay. I think we definitely need to put it into an actual event. Problem being, the mod lifecycle is not something I'm familiar with, because that didn't exist in 1.12. And the thing I'm staring at is also apparently itself a little out of date. Okay. Wait, that would appear to be the exact bus I'm looking for, actually. So let's see. Call it faction defaults, I guess. I guess we just put it on the faction bus, actually. What is your problem? Faction bus does not define on config loaded that is applicable here. What are you looking for then? This is me trying to figure something out that is very not documented. So apologies if this looks like trial and error, because it is. What is your problem here? Cannot infer type arguments. Okay, let's drag this over here. Right here is an example of what we are looking for. So what's going on here? What if we just move that over to here? Do we think that would work? Do we think it's just the location? Nope, doesn't seem to like that either. If I can figure this out in the next, like, 6 minutes. Should be at. Oh, did I not make it static? Yep, I did make it static, that's the problem. Did that just work? I think that might have just worked. Okay. Let's find out. Did I say if I can fix this in the next 6 minutes and then fix it in at 1? Broken state. Null again. Guessing, yeah, the exact same line, the exact same point. But now we're actually calling it on the right event bus, so there's that. See if that quickly fixes it, and also doesn't break it, which could also happen, I guess. Nope, still broken. Interesting. Which means it's not faction defaults that's null, it's faction settings. Still null, okay. This is really hacky, but well. That should catch anything in that line that is wrong. Won't fix it, but it'll just stop the game from crashing. Come on. Hey, I saw it. I think I saw it. Reading factions. And I lost it, because it overflowed. There we are! Reading factions, inputs, all of that. Reading kobold, reading goblin. Huzzah! We got it. Okay, so that solved it. Again, hacky as hell, but we got it. So now, we can actually have it cause stuff to happen. I might leave player reputations to next week, but anyways, back in town, everybody. everybody, to the final hour of our evening today, and we have just successfully managed to populate a config value with our faction data, our fairly complex faction data, in fact, and now we are also able to reconstitute it from the config value on the server, so we are therefore able to reference it for entity AI. We want to do something fun with this to start off with, because we don't have player interactions, but fortunately, we can try using the mob AI to interact between factions now, because we actually define relationships between factions. So, currently, kobolds and goblins utterly hate each other. We could, for instance, however, change it to be like goblins don't care, but kobolds hate them if we want to make it one side, as it were. So, we're gonna try and add ourselves a quick little entity AI for targeting faction mobs that we don't like, essentially. So, let's see, entity AI targets hostile faction. Now, I wonder if any of these actually affect... I don't think they take a, what's the phrase? I don't think they take any kind of predicate, which is a little bit of a problem. WTS, I don't know what that means, Nope. You're gonna have to help me there. But anyways, we need a private mob entity. Because we're gonna need to check that. It needs to ideally extend faction mob. We can check that and should execute anyways. We're going to manually caching config values as well. They're really expensive to access with any regularity. Noted, not a problem right now. We store it in the config as a string. We then also reload it with that, and then that what this reloads into is what we actually use right here. So there's our defaults. Those get used by here to populate the config. We then, whenever the config gets reloaded, retrieve them and compile into that. So we're not actually accessing the config very much there. But anyways, let's see, nearest attackable target goal? Does that does allow a target predicate. Good. Okay, with that, we can conquer the world. So for that, that also takes a target class. We don't need to care what the class is. In fact, we ideally don't care at all what the class is. But target goal itself does not take a predicate. That starts in here, I think. Target entity selector, yeah, right there. So we need nearby only, check site, target chance, and then the predicate, which we will create ourselves, so that part's fine. Basically, we just need this. Oh, I forgot about the horrible formatting. Okay, so we don't need target class, because this is agnostic as to what we're dealing with, and our target selector is going to be manufactured right here. So target class we don't care about, target chance we do, which is just, I think, yep, an integer. That's it, I will take that on board, Nope, for the other config values that we have, which are mostly toggles. Okay, we probably do want to have the nearest targets. But it's mostly just used for when we start targeting, so there's that. Okay. So predicates, living entity. If we go to mob entity, then we won't target nearby players, which we kind of need. Targets predicates equals new predicates living entity. What is your problem? Must implement the abstract one of test. Okay, that's Java. Oh, I wonder. What is your problem? Blank field, final field entity may not have been. Huh? Oh. Never actually put it in there, did I? Apparently. Oh, I did. It just got up. Yeah. Got overridden. Okay. So, return. And what we need to be looking at is we need to get the faction of the entity. We need to get the faction of the input. And we need to see what the relationship of this entity's faction is with that entity's faction. So, owner faction equals factions, formerly faction defaults, to get, let's see, probably say get faction, there, of entity, and faction, input faction, and then return, owner faction dot relation with input faction dot name allows interaction enum interaction dot attack. Okay. So let's see, if entity instance of I faction mob, which I think is the name of it, yes it is, good, then return get I faction mob entity dot get faction name. Okay. So check we don't actually have a null in here. There. So if the two are not null, and the owner's faction is hostile to the extreme with the other faction, then go for it. Okay. Now we just need to apply that. I mean, more or less the same exact way that this goes. And a lot of this does not need to be broken down this much. Let's just bring this onto here. If you wanted to say like goblins of a specific faction, then we would just plug in this into this over here, with its custom predicate, but we are not. We are saying any entity of that faction. Hence why this is a little bit more weird. Quite considerably more involved, in fact. But the upside of that is we can, in fact, get this set up pretty quickly. Okay, so I should note there is currently nothing that stops you from making a faction hostile to itself. If you have if you just say if you just set the reputation of the same name as that faction to itself, then it will theoretically be self-hostile, which I don't know why you would, but if you want to see a kobold civil war, that's a thing you can do, I guess. Let's see, positions, targetable area, target distance. Okay. Is it fully actually defined in here? It is indeed. Okay. That's just its bounding box grown by target distance. Okay. Again, a lot of this does not need to be broken apart as nearly as much as it is. Left-hand side of the argument must be a variable. Oh, I missed, I think I have. Okay, what's your problem? Okay, so it doesn't take an entity predicate. Interesting. Okay, get closest. There you are. Closest living entity. Target entity selector. Wait, what? I'm really misreading this. Okay, so there's this function, which doesn't have a name. And there is get closest entity, which I presume is the thing it's looking for. Co-owner, position, eyes, targetable area. Okay. What is your problem? Okay, well, whatever function that is appears to work, so we'll just use it. It's undocumented, so I don't know. it does seem to just literally call. Okay, so closest entity is a sorter, essentially. Weirdness, but I'll take it. Okay. That should be set to go. In which case, we just need to check. We just need to input it basically into the kobolds. So let's see, where's our hates goblin code in here? We don't actually seem to have it. Interesting. Yeah, that might just be actually inside of their base classes. So let's see, nearest attackable, there we are, goblins. Okay. So new entity AI, target hostile faction. To modify it slightly so that it understands what we're asking it. Let's see, what's that one? Good, okay. Just tidy that up real quick. Right. So now, we turn that off. We do the same in the goblins, and we should firstly see nothing change, but then we can change the config and see if they actually, like, alter. I don't actually see anything in here that attacks kobolds. Interesting. Is that part of their controller? Yes, it is. Okay. Turn that off. Okay. Let's see how this goes. So at first, nothing should change, but then we'll alter the config so that they're on good terms, or even just neutral terms with each other. And that should mean that they don't attack each other anymore. We'll see. Do we believe in peace in our time between kobolds and goblins? Let's find out. Okay. Pardon me, rats. Goblin on the right. Kobold on the left. And they definitely hate each other. Okay. Unload so that they actually like clear their target. Right. There's our goblin stuff right there. There's that. Okay, good. So now they have 100, which means that they are at max rep with each other. So we save that. Yes, config has changed. We go in, and now they shouldn't murder each other. Hopefully. World hasn't crashed so far, that's a good sign. Doesn't usually take this long though, I will say. Ah. Interesting. Hasn't crashed, but it has frozen mysteriously. Just close and reboot it, see if that fixes it. Okay, good, has not defaulted it back. A crash that says it's not a crash. I mean, a crash that was more a freeze, really, so who knows. If it repeats here, we know there's something up. Okay, we're in. And they're not trying to eat each other. Yes! Okay. We've now essentially got configurable mob aggression. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, I love it so much. Yeah, apologies for the rats, guys. Hooray! They can be friends now! In fact, ostensibly they are friends. What I could also do inside the config is just remove their relation, and then they would use the default. Hooray! Yay! Okay, so let's tweak that again, just to see if we can find out what happened. So negative 100, negative 100. Config has changed, and they are now neutral? Oh no, they're better than neutral, they're best friends. Okay, I think we do need to restart. I think that is a thing that we need to tell the config. It needs to actually restart at that point. Okay, note to self, that requires a significant restart. So let's actually mark that as such down here. Is there a thing for this? I could have sworn there was a thing for this. Config changes only apply on game reset. Well, not necessarily. The ones that we change for the types currently echo through quite happily. But those ones evidently not. But yes, goody! We now have actual controlled aggression like that. That's good. Okay, so let me go to the various oddities config from 112. Just feed in what the actual values are. Groups is not it. Mobs might be it. Let's see. Bosses, faction rep. Initial for goblins is -30. Okay. And let's also move that into the controllers here. There isn't currently a child kobold behavior, but I suppose theoretically, which in theory means there's a distinction between the child goblins and child kobolds, in that the child kobolds will pick a fight. But we should be able to actually just make it. Was adult, maybe? Keep it as is. And now we need new predicates. Entity kobold, very simple. We just need to ask, is this particular kobold a child? An actual baby. Is this particular kobold just baby? And we'll give them we'll give them the Pride Parade behavior. Okay, so that goes bye-bye. Swim, water, avoid walking. Swim to things back because it's free in there. Okay. We don't, like, the reason I don't put that in the actual basic one is that, we don't want the guards being involved in Pride Parades, because then they might leave their charges actually, like, unprotected. That'd be bad. Now, a bit clear what that is now. Confirm Kobold is baby? I mean, basically that's what I just did. Okay, I'm gonna leave in Goblin hostility to players, at least for the time being. At least until we actually get, Can we? Actually, yeah, I can fix that up just by changing this a bit. So,
Player has joined the game.
Hello. So, in the case of players, players don't have an associated faction, at least not yet. What they just have is the factional reputation. So from there, we need to go and ask what we need to get what the owner's faction's rep is with that player. So if inputs get type, I should use that, that's cheaper, equals player entity types dot player, is it? Entity type dot player? I'm getting closer. There we go. Is that a forge port of the faction problem? Looking. Yes and no. This is a faction function in another mod. Okay, so if it's a player, we have to retrieve its integer value otherwise. And let's return false for the time being. Okay. Let me just stick a link in here. Loop. There we go. That command probably needs updating because we are functionally currently working on the 1.16 version. But what we are currently trying to do is implement faction reputation both between players and mobs and between different mobs. We can't currently do that with any mob, but we can do it with some interesting ones anyways. So previously, we could just say kobolds and goblins hate each other, as is the custom, and also you can be on good terms with both of them, or neither of them, or whichever. Now we can also say that we can actually configure whether or not kobolds and goblins hate each other. Hightail style in Minecraft. I guess, yeah. Pretty RPG. This is heavily based on Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, the subtitle for the mod is the Monster Manual of Minecraft. But anyways. So let's just earmark what we're gonna do here. So, if that equals that, and well, I guess theoretically we just say if owner faction doesn't exist, that'd be a starter. Doesn't equal null, then we do that stuff. There, that helps. Okay. So if the owner of this task has a faction, which should be a given, because why would you give it to something otherwise? Then we can ask the faction what the reputation is with that player, which would be more specifically going to the player's player data. So retrieve player data. Retrieve faction reputation from player data. And query attack interaction from reputation. Okay, so let's say that for the time being reputation is 0, or more specifically, let's say the reputation is the default of the faction. So then return, let's see, I think enum attitude, is that the one I'm thinking of? Yes. From rep, that reputation allows interaction, enum interaction, attack. Okay. Now, I believe -30 default rep does not allow for attack, but let's find out. Yeah, not by default. So, you'll currently, this will render the goblins perfectly docile for the most part. A bit unfriendly. They will retaliate against you, but they won't actually attack you outright. That's obviously another AI piece I need to add, but it's a start. Okay. So let me just insert a to-do here, because we don't have player data re-implemented right now, so... But okay, there we go. Hurrah! Doing some really interesting stuff so far? Ah, good to know. There's a ton more to implement. Let me see, what is the changelog of this version alone so far? We've re-implemented creature types, which are sort of like Origins mods, but extremely, like, Lego pieces, you plug them together and you can get a whole bunch of different effects. We've got the types command, which allows us to control those in-game, as well as check for them if you use a command block, so you can, like, trigger redstone and stuff with it. We have partially, should probably put an asterisk there, because we haven't finished that, re-implemented crabs and giant crabs from the 1.12 versions. We adjusted the spawn settings, and we have grossly expanded the creature types from 1.12. We have a bunch more to do here, so we're working on factions here at the moment. I've got a few bug fixes up here to do. We've got add wargs and wargs, which are basically angry dogs. They're wolves that have been raised by goblins, and one of those, I forget which, is a rideable mount. So imagine that big of a woofer. And then we just have the rest of crabs and giant crabs, which formerly were the scourge of the sea when you played with various oddities, because giant crabs were basically the only hostile mob in 1.12 at the time that could actually spawn. So they just dominated the ocean. 1.12 didn't have a concept of a sea monster, so... You're implementing crabs, do they drop anything? Not currently. The reason being this is meant to be much more modular than the 1.12 version. So kobolds will drop kobold scales, but the kobold scales don't really do anything. Goblins also drop goblin ears, because you might want to use those. But for the most part, this is just a mobs only core mod. If you want to have items and world gen and all sorts of other things, then there's going to be much smaller mods that you can tack onto this. But various oddities by itself is pretty much just the mobs, which is what a lot of people wanted in the first place anyways, but then there was also a ton of people that wanted... Okay, history time. Before my brain gets away with me. Various Oddities was originally created as essentially a skin pack for custom NPCs, but people kept, like, they saying, we really love the mobs, but we'd like to be able to do more with them. So I started adding AI to them, and then people were just like, this is really nice, but it'd be nice if they, like, dropped loot that we could make use of, and people just kept asking for more out-of-the-box functionality. So we added whole tons of items, we added magic spells, we added the faction type, the faction settings, the creature type settings, we added a whole ton of world gem, we added a whale dimension, which is a whole story in and of itself, really. And then it just became this big, bloated, for the most part, like massive feature creep mod that was still fun to play with, but was really, really hard to update, which is why it was in 1.12 and we are now in 1.16 from scratch, essentially. So for 1.16 forward, we're going modular. We're saying we're just going to have Various Oddities itself be a mobs-only mod, and then we can have various world gen, various magics, all sorts of stuff, as like separate things, which should hopefully make it easier to update. Because before, if I had started on one thing and I hadn't finished it, then I couldn't release a version at all without commenting it out. So it was massive pain. Anyways, we have successfully implemented hostility towards different factions. So now let's make it so we can add other things, like making the child goblins flee, which is a thing that they do, from a hostile faction. Not stuck in 1.7 and not by choice. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I will say, updating to this has been a massive pain in the neck, but it did allow us to have some little bits of fun. Because before, for instance, we didn't have any... foxes weren't a thing in 1.12. So, we weren't able to do anything with the foxes for this. Is this the right version? No, it is not. That's the 1.12 version. This is the 1.16 version. Okay. Yeah, foxes didn't exist in 1.12, which was amusing because there was a creature known as the Witch, which shapeshifts frequently when you're not looking. And one of the things it shifted into was a fox. Unless you make your own foxes. I keep intending to make like a big rideable fox that just like spawns in next to me every time I'm on the server. But, oh well. But yeah, now that we're in 1.16, we have access to actual foxes. So purely for fun, we gave them a Skeletons Halloween kind of effect, where during the winter period, they have, like, scarves and booties and hats and whatnot. It's very adorable. Like, just all cute. Okay. So we've given the kobold children their own controller now. Controllers here are a custom AI setup, because I can't do a proper one in Minecraft because they don't have a concept of it, but it basically just uninstalls and installs a bunch of AI codes as is contextually appropriate, which makes it way easier to control, like, what things should be active when. So we have the Guardian, for instance, which are basically, they guard kobold hatcheries. So they just have the AI tasks necessary for guarding a kobold hatchery, which means that they don't breed and they don't go on pride parades. Conversely, we have the child one here, which just goes on pride parades, currently, because we just created it. It's like goblin children have different behavior to goblin adults and such. Dealing with entities is a pain in the butt in the first place. It's my specialty. The pain I get is from dealing with what Minecraft made of entities. Like, okay. So let's see. The next step is to add player data so we can get the faction reps in. Then, the faction bus should already be fully operational. Let's have a quick look. So string victim faction returns the faction of the given mob, if any. That probably needs to be changed because we have... that gets a string, but don't we have... No, that's in factions. That's what I'm thinking of. Okay, that's fine then. Well, I probably want to move a bunch of stuff from faction rep to factions, but it's fine. Okay, yes, goods. There isn't really any reference to faction bus in here, so it should be okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that should be fine. So this is functional. So the next thing is to just more or less get the faction data in. So currently, we can just set the reputations between goblins and kobolds. And then from next, we're going to be able to add string to integer tuples to player data, displaying their reputation with a given faction, which will then also affect hostility and such. Good. Mention this being a core mod. It's not a core. Okay. Slight linguistic problem here. Core mod with no space means a mod that you basically need to install in the core of things, and it changes a whole ton of stuff, and it frequently breaks a ton of stuff. Core space mod is like essentially a root library of a number of different mods. So you have that mod, it probably does something by itself or nothing quite frequently, but it's a dependency of other mods. In this case, Various Oddities 1.16 is a core space mod. And then various magic, various items, various world gen, all that sort of stuff just has a dependency of Various Oddities. Yes, core module, exactly. Module is an especially fitting term, given how much of this is based on Dungeons and Dragons. So there's just sort of the Various Oddities family, of which you start with Various Oddities. Or at least that's the plan. We don't currently have any of those modules just yet, because we're still working on getting the base foundations in here. So for instance, the magic system already exists whole cloth inside of Various Oddities. It's just not populated. There's no spells there. When we have Various Magic, then it'll basically just tack on to Various Oddities and populate that registry. That's basically how the faction... That's basically how the modules should work. Oh, I have so much to do here, but yeah, there's the getting reputation from players, there's putting it, there's setting it. Yeah. So faction reputation effectively just handles players for the most part. Yeah, this handles all of the changing. Whereas this is just the actual factions. Okay. In theory, then we can have a player relation with kind of thing here. Oh well. Okay, worried for a second because what was broken in vanilla for this mod to work? Yeah, exactly, no. I started out only making core mods. And I don't think I ever released a single one. Because I significantly hated Forge and its monopoly on everything. And I still do, but at least now it has competition in Fabric. I hated that in order to make mods you had to work with Forge or else basically no one would ever, like, download your mod ever. But, well, now I eventually broke down. I was like, okay, if I ever want anyone to ever actually be able to use these things, I have to do it on Forge. But okay, so, good progress. We successfully managed to make kobolds and goblins hate each other, then like each other, then hate each other all over again. So, that should be good to go. We just need to get the player side of things going. And then your reputation will be able to shift and ebb with different factions quite happily. And that is a thing for another time. So I will catch you next week with more of that. On Thursday at 9 PM we have some more Among Us. Then on Saturday we have some more Carousel with the patrons and some random games. And we're back for this on Tuesday. Meanwhile, I do make videos over youtube.com/remembercomic. There was a nice little clip from yesterday's bonus stream, came out just today. And everything I do is powered by you over at patreon.com/lying. Hope you've all enjoyed, and I will as ever catch you all next time. This is a very ominous soundtrack to end a stream on, but you know, certainly beats several thousand logs breaking at once. And also their, like, leaves.